go, and I'll marry you.
Billionaire said, laughing as her guests followed her gaze. He's just the janitor, someone added, like it settled everything. The man holding the vacuum didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't explain himself. He simply unplugged the cord and stepped back, calm enough to unsettle the room. They didn't know silence was his oldest discipline. Before the night ended, that same silence would own them all. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. Because what was happening wasn't about a joke. It was about who society decided was allowed to matter. The laughter lingered longer than the echo of the words, clinging to the marble lobby like perfume too expensive to name. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished shoes and tailored gowns, while the man in gray coveralls stood exactly where he always did, where no one ever looked twice. The piano, a 7-figure centerpiece flown in from Vienna, gleamed under spotlights meant for donors, not workers. Cameras were already rolling. This gala wasn't just a concert, it was a declaration of power. He bent slightly, set the vacuum aside with care, and adjusted the worn strap of his work bag. The calm wasn't performative. It was practiced. Years of choosing silence over reaction had taught him how to breathe through humiliation without letting it settle in his bones. His eyes flicked once to the piano keys, then away, like a habit he'd broken long ago. "Hey," a stagehand whispered, embarrassed on his behalf. "Just keep moving." He nodded and did exactly that. The service corridor swallowed him whole, replacing music with the low hum of generators and the smell of metal polish. His boots echoed softly as he walked, each step measured, unhurried. That was how he moved through everything now, quietly, deliberately, like the world was something fragile he couldn't afford to disturb. At home, his son was waiting. The apartment was small but clean, lit by a single lamp that hummed when the radiator kicked on. Shoes were lined neatly by the door, a habit passed down without explanation. He hung his jacket, washed his hands twice, and listened. A soft cough came from the bedroom, followed by a pause that always lasted half a second too long. "I'm here," he said gently, pushing the door open. The boy lay propped against pillows, sketchbook open on his lap, pencil tucked behind his ear. He smiled when he saw him, the kind of smile that tried to pretend everything was fine. It worked most days. Tonight, it didn't. "Did they play music?" the boy asked. "Not yet," he said, sitting beside him. "Soon," the boy nodded, fingers brushing the small object that always hung around his father's neck. A tarnished piano key on a thin chain. He traced it absently, the way other kids held lucky coins or superhero figures. Neither of them talked about where it came from. Some things didn't need words. Later, after medicine and lights out, he stood alone by the window. The city pulsed below, alive with wealth and noise in rooms he no longer belonged in. Somewhere across town, donors raised glasses beneath chandeliers, still laughing at a joke made at his expense. He didn't hate them. Hate took too much energy. What he felt instead was resolve, steady and unyielding. The next evening, the concert hall buzzed with anticipation. Security tightened. Technicians whispered. The woman who owned the building arrived in a tailored white suit, confidence sharp as glass. She swept through the lobby like she owned more than stone and steel. Like she owned people. From the shadows of the service wing, he watched it all. Watched the piano being rolled into place. Watched the sound engineers argue in clipped voices. Watched a subtle tension ripple through the staff as something small went wrong, then another thing. He noticed the details no one else did. The pitch of the hum. The way the stage floor vibrated a fraction longer than it should have. The piano key pendant pressed warm against his chest, a reminder he didn't ask for but never removed. A technician cursed under his breath. A manager waved it off. Money would solve it. It always did. He picked up his mop and moved forward, back into the spaces meant for labor, not leadership. That was where he belonged. That was where he'd always been most dangerous. As the house lights dimmed and the audience settled, he paused at the edge of the stage, unseen and uninvited. The piano waited under the lights, perfect and unforgiving. He exhaled slowly. The night wasn't finished with him yet. The night settled into a careful hush, the kind that pressed against eardrums and made every breath feel audible. From his place near the service stairs, he listened as the audience shifted, silk brushing fabric, shoes tapping marble, anticipation humming louder than the orchestra warming up backstage. He tightened his grip on the mop handle, not because he needed it, but because holding something familiar kept his thoughts steady. A technician hurried past, muttering about feedback and dead zones. Another followed, headset askew, voice sharp with irritation. "It shouldn't sound like that," she said. "We tested everything twice." No one answered her. They rarely did when panic started creeping in. He glanced toward the stage. The piano sat alone beneath the lights, polished to a mirror shine. Even from a distance he could see the slight misalignment in the lid, the way it reflected sound unevenly toward the ceiling. It was subtle. Expensive problems often were. "Hey!" a voice whispered behind him. A young usher hovered, eyes darting. "You're not supposed to be here during the performance." He nodded once. "I'll move," he said, already stepping back. Calm, compliant. Invisible. The usher hesitated, then leaned closer. "People are saying the acoustics feel off. Like something swallowing the sound." He shrugged lightly. "Big rooms do that." The usher frowned, like she wanted to ask more, but the house lights dimmed further and applause erupted. She rushed away, swallowed by the crowd. As the first notes filled the hall, his jaw tightened. The sound was clean, technically perfect, yet something was wrong. The resonance bled where it shouldn't. The piano fought the room, each note losing its edge before it reached the back rows. He could almost map the problem in his head, tracing invisible lines through air and wood and space. Up in the private balcony, the billionaire leaned back, satisfied smile fixed in place. This was her world, curated, controlled, obedient. She didn't hear the flaw. None of them did. They heard prestige, not precision. A memory surfaced uninvited. Another hall, another piano, a younger version of himself bowing under thunderous applause. He pushed it away. That life was sealed off, like a room he no longer entered. The music faltered. Just a fraction. Enough for trained ears to notice. A ripple of unease moved through the orchestra. The conductor adjusted, compensating, sweat beading at his temple. Backstage, voices rose. "It's the lid angle," someone snapped. "No, it's the dampers." "Can we fix it quietly?" He shifted his weight, heart picking up pace despite his efforts. This was the moment he always dreaded, the space between noticing and acting. Stepping forward meant being seen. Staying back meant letting it fail. He thought of the boy at home, curled beneath thin blankets, trusting him to keep things steady. That trust mattered more than pride ever had. A sharp squeal cut through the hall. Gasps followed. The pianist froze mid-phrase, hands hovering uselessly above the keys. The conductor stopped, baton suspended, confusion etched across his face. Whispers bloomed like cracks in ice. "What's happening? Is that normal?" The billionaire straightened, irritation flashing. "Fix it!" she hissed to no one in particular. Technicians scrambled, tools clattering. Money couldn't smooth this over fast enough. Cameras zoomed in. The flaw was no longer subtle. He took a step forward before he could stop himself. "Sir!" a stage manager snapped, blocking his path. "This area's restricted!" "I know," he said quietly. "But the soundboard's fighting the room. You'll keep chasing it unless you adjust the lid and the floor mics together." She stared at him, startled by the certainty in his voice. "And you know that how?" He hesitated, the old reflex to retreat flaring. Then he inhaled slowly. "Because it's a standing wave problem." The hall's eating the mid-range. Silence hung between them, heavy and electric. Behind her, the orchestra waited, the audience restless. Somewhere above, the billionaire watched, impatience sharpening her gaze. The stage manager swallowed. "If you're wrong, I won't be," he said, not arrogant, just sure. A beat passed. Then she stepped aside. As he moved toward the stage, heart steadying, the piano key pendant warmed against his chest, grounding him. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about fixing what others couldn't see. Before he reached the lights, let me pause for a second. If you're enjoying stories where quiet strength slowly turns the tables, subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. He climbed the steps, unseen by most, yet suddenly central to everything. The piano waited. The room held its breath. And for the first time that night, the balance of power shifted, just enough for possibility to slip through. The stage manager's hand dropped, and the path ahead opened like a held breath finally released. He stepped forward, the edge of the spotlight catching the gray of his coveralls, the scuffed boots that didn't belong on polished wood. A few heads turned. Most didn't. The orchestra watched with open confusion as he crouched beside the piano, fingers hovering without touching, listening first. Always listening. The hall still hummed with unease. The failed note lingered in memory, sour and embarrassing. Somewhere above, the woman in white leaned forward, eyes narrowed, lips pressed thin. This interruption wasn't in her program. Nothing unscripted ever was. He adjusted the piano lid by a fraction, barely visible, then reached down to the floor microphones, angling them inward instead of out. The movement was economical, practiced. No wasted motion. The conductor frowned, then tilted his head, sensing something shift even before sound returned. "Who let him up there?" the billionaire snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through murmurs. An assistant bent toward her, whispering frantically, eyes darting between stage and audience. Cameras were still rolling. Too late to pretend this wasn't happening. He straightened slowly and nodded once to the pianist, a small signal loaded with confidence. The pianist hesitated, then played. The note bloomed full and rich, filling the room instead of dissolving into it. A collective inhale swept the audience. Another note followed, then another, each landing exactly where it should. The orchestra eased back in, relief spreading like warmth. Whispers surged again, this time edged with awe. "That sounds better." What did he do? The woman in white stiffened. Better wasn't acceptable. Better implied failure before. She stood, the movement drawing attention despite herself. "Enough," she said loudly. "Who are you?" He looked up, meeting her gaze without challenge or apology. "Maintenance," he said simply. Laughter bubbled from somewhere, nervous and uncertain. She seized it, letting it restore her footing. "Maintenance thinks he can fix what professionals couldn't?" Her smile returned, brittle and performative. "That's adorable." The conductor turned slightly, caught between deference and truth. "The adjustment worked," he said carefully. Her eyes flashed. "For now." He stepped back, already yielding space, not interested in spotlight. The job was done. Or so he thought. Backstage, technicians clustered around him, questions spilling out faster than he could answer. He deflected gently, pointing them toward specifics without claiming credit. Years ago, he'd learned that being right didn't require being loud. From the balcony, she watched him retreat, irritation giving way to something else. Unease. The janitor wasn't supposed to unsettle her. People like him were scenery, useful only when invisible. The performance continued. Smoother now, but the energy had changed. Every flawless note sharpened the contrast between what should have happened and what almost hadn't. The audience leaned in, engaged in spite of themselves. During intermission, the lobby buzzed. Guests clustered around champagne flutes, dissecting the interruption like gossip. He moved through them with a trash bin, collecting napkins and half-finished drinks, head down, senses alert. "Did you see that?" a donor whispered. "The janitor fixed it." "Probably a coincidence," another replied. "These people like attention." He didn't react. He'd heard worse. Near the service elevators, the stage manager caught up to him. "You saved us back there," she said quietly. "What's your background?" He met her eyes, then looked away. "I fix things," he said. True enough. She studied him, suspicion mixing with gratitude. "If something else goes wrong." "I'll be close," he replied, already moving on. Above, the woman in white paced her private lounge, anger simmering. She hated uncertainty more than embarrassment. Power meant control, and tonight, control had slipped. She called for her head of operations, voice low and dangerous. "Find out who he is," she said. "Now." As the second half began, tension coiled tighter. The music soared, perfect now, almost defiant. He stood in the shadows, listening, mapping the hall again. Problems rarely came alone. They traveled in patterns. The piano key pendant rested warm against his chest, a steady weight. He thought of the boy's fingers tracing its edges, of trust placed without question. Whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he always did. Quietly. Completely. The applause at intermission felt louder than it should have, like the room was trying to convince itself everything was fine. He stood near the service door, hands folded loosely in front of him, listening past the claps to the building itself. Old structures spoke if you knew how to hear them. This one whispered imbalance. Backstage, the mood had shifted from panic to brittle relief. Technicians moved faster now, not because they were confident, but because they were afraid of another surprise. Cables were checked twice. Headsets crackled with overlapping instructions. No one looked directly at him, yet no one ignored him either. That was new. From the corner of his eye he noticed security repositioning, subtle, intentional. The kind of movement that meant someone important felt exposed. The woman in white reappeared near the wings, her smile reassembled with care. Up close, the confidence looked rehearsed, like a role she'd played too long to drop. She spoke with the conductor, her laugh a fraction too loud, then turned her gaze toward the staff. It slid over faces until it landed on him. There it was, recognition without understanding, the most dangerous kind. She walked over, heels precise against the floor. "You!" she said, not bothering to lower her voice. "What's your name?" A few heads turned. The air tightened. He answered calmly, giving only his first name. Nothing more. Names had weight. He'd learned to ration them. She nodded, as if filing it away. "You stepped out of line earlier." "I solved a problem," he replied evenly. Her smile sharpened. "That's not your job." The words were familiar. He'd heard versions of them in boardrooms and basements, spoken by people who believed authority defined truth. He met her gaze, unblinking. The room needed it. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even doubt. Then it vanished, replaced by dismissal. "This ends after tonight," she said softly. "I don't like unpredictability." She turned away before he could respond, already certain she'd won. The orchestra resumed. Music filled the hall again, flawless now, but the earlier disruption lingered like a hairline crack. He stayed close to the stage, senses alert, scanning for the next failure point. Experience told him there would be one. Systems under stress always revealed their weakest seam. Halfway through the set, he felt it, a subtle vibration underfoot, out of sync with the tempo. His jaw tightened. The floor mics were compensating too hard. The balance he'd restored was shifting again. He moved without drawing attention, slipping beneath the stage where shadows swallowed sound. The space smelled of dust and oil, familiar and grounding. He knelt, adjusting brackets, redistributing weight, working by feel as much as sight. Above him, the music wavered, then steadied. A bead of sweat traced his spine. He exhaled slowly. When he emerged, the stage manager was waiting. "They're asking questions," she murmured. "The donor circle. They want to know who fixed it." He shook his head slightly. "Let them talk." She hesitated. "She won't." As if summoned, the woman in white appeared again, flanked by two executives. Her patience had thinned. "You seem very comfortable touching equipment you don't understand," she said coldly. He wiped his hands on a rag, unhurried. "I understand it." A ripple of tension passed through the small group. One executive cleared his throat. "The sound has never been this clean." "That's coincidence," she snapped, then caught herself, smile snapping back into place. "We'll discuss this later." Later was a threat, not a promise. The performance ended to a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Donors beamed. The hall looked triumphant. Only a few people noticed how tightly she clapped, how her eyes never left him as the crowd began to disperse. Afterward, the staff filtered into the service corridors, adrenaline draining fast. Someone clapped him on the shoulder in thanks. Someone else offered coffee. He accepted neither. Gratitude was fleeting. Consequences lasted longer. In the locker room, he sat on the bench and loosened his boots, muscles finally acknowledging fatigue. The piano key pendant slipped from beneath his shirt. He caught it instinctively, thumb brushing its worn edge. His phone buzzed. A message from home. A photo of a half-finished drawing and a simple caption, "Still awake." He smiled despite himself. As he stood to leave, footsteps echoed behind him. The stage manager lingered in the doorway. "Be careful," she said quietly. "You embarrassed her." He nodded once. She embarrassed herself. Outside, the night air was cool and sharp. The concert hall glowed behind him, all glass and prestige. He walked away from it, unaware that upstairs plans were already forming, plans that assumed money could still control the narrative. They were wrong. The building had chosen its side. The service elevator hummed as it carried him down, the vibration settling into his knees like a delayed echo of the night. He kept his gaze on the scuffed metal doors, breathing evenly, letting the adrenaline bleed off on its own terms. Above him, applause still rang faintly through the bones of the building, a ghost of approval that didn't belong to him anyway. The doors opened into the underground corridor, cooler and dimmer, the kind of place designed for movement, not recognition. He welcomed it. Fame had weight. So did resentment. Both were easier to manage at a distance. He hadn't gone far when hurried footsteps approached from behind. "Wait," the stage manager called softly, catching up to him near the loading bay. Her face was flushed, equal parts relief and urgency. "I know you don't want attention, but this isn't going to stay quiet." He paused, turning just enough to acknowledge her. "It never does." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "She's asking for your file. Employment history. Anything." "That won't tell her much," he said. "That's what worries me," she replied. "People like her don't like gaps." He nodded, accepting the truth without reacting to it. Gaps were where assumptions rushed in. "I'll be careful." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled something out. A small security badge older than the rest, its edges worn smooth. "This fell out of your locker earlier. I meant to give it back." He froze for half a second too long. The badge was outdated, the logo no longer in use, but he recognized it instantly. A conservatory emblem, stylized and unmistakable to anyone who'd ever lived inside that world. His thumb brushed the surface before he could stop himself. Her eyes sharpened. "This isn't maintenance?" He closed his fingers around it, expression unreadable. "It's a souvenir. A lot of people here collect souvenirs," she said carefully. "They don't usually carry ones like that." Silence stretched. The loading bay lights flickered once, buzzing softly. He met her gaze. "Please," he said, not pleading, just firm. "Let it be." She studied him, then nodded. "For now." When she walked away, he leaned back against the concrete wall, chest tight. The piano key pendant rested heavy against his sternum, the badge burning in his palm like a mistake. Symbols had a way of betraying the lives people tried to bury. At home, the apartment was quiet except for the familiar rhythm of shallow breathing from the bedroom. He washed his hands, changed his clothes, then sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to wake the boy. The sketchbook lay open beside him, pages filled with rough drawings of pianos, keys exaggerated, almost alive. "Couldn't sleep?" he whispered. The boy's eyes opened, soft and alert. "Did it work?" he asked. "Yes," he said. "It worked." A small smile appeared, then faded. "They were mean again?" He hesitated, then chose honesty. "Some of them." The boy reached out, fingers finding the pendant automatically. "You didn't play?" "No. Why not?" He considered the question, the weight behind it. "Because sometimes fixing something is more important than being seen." The boy nodded, absorbing it like truth rather than lesson. "You still know how," he said quietly. "It wasn't a question." He swallowed. "Yes." Morning came too soon. He returned to the hall with the same steady pace, badge tucked deep in his bag, pendant hidden beneath his shirt. The building felt different now, watchful. Conversations paused when he passed. Eyes lingered longer. In the executive corridor, glass walls reflected tailored silhouettes and quiet power. He was mopping near the corner office when voices carried through the door. "She made a fool of herself," one executive said. "She'll recover," another replied. "She always does." "And the janitor." A pause. "Handle it." The door opened abruptly. She stepped out, expression cool, assessing. "Walk with me," she said, already moving. He followed, matching her stride without rushing. "You enjoy embarrassing people?" she asked. "I enjoy doing my job," he replied. She stopped, turning sharply. "Your job doesn't include touching my piano. It includes making sure the building functions," he said evenly. "That piano is part of the building." Her lips thinned. "You think very highly of yourself." He shook his head. "I think accurately." For a moment the mask slipped. Anger flashed, then calculation. "You're not just maintenance," she said. "What are you hiding?" He met her gaze, calm, unbroken. "Nothing that concerns you." Her eyes dropped, briefly, to his chest. The chain glinted where his collar had shifted. She frowned. "What's that?" He didn't answer. Later, alone in the service stairwell, he pressed his back to the wall and closed his eyes. The line between invisibility and exposure was thinning. The badge in his bag felt heavier with every step. If you're still here, take a second and subscribe now. Stories like this only work if we keep telling them. He opened his eyes, resolve settling in again. The discovery had begun, whether he wanted it or not. And symbols, once seen, couldn't be unseen. The building remembered him now. The building felt different the moment he stepped inside, like it had inhaled and was holding it. Conversations softened as he passed, voices dropping not out of respect but curiosity. People watched him now, not openly, not boldly, but with the quiet attention reserved for something that didn't fit where it stood. He kept his head down and his pace even, the mop bucket rolling beside him with its familiar rattle. Routine mattered. Routine reminded everyone, including himself, that he still belonged where power never bothered to look. Yet even the floor seemed less forgiving beneath his boots, every step echoing longer than it should have. Near the sound booth, a junior technician adjusted her headset, eyes flicking toward him again and again. She'd been on duty the night of the gala. She'd seen the precision in his hands, the way he hadn't asked permission from the piano, only listened. When he paused to replace a trash liner, she cleared her throat like she meant to speak, then stopped herself. Questions were dangerous things. Once asked, they demanded answers. He moved on before she found her courage. Backstage, the piano sat open, stripped of its cover, vulnerable in a way expensive things rarely allowed. His assignment for the afternoon had been clear. Polish the keys, clean the casing, restore the shine. It sounded ordinary enough on paper. In practice, it was a test. He approached slowly, awareness sharpening. The smell of wood and polish grounded him, muscle memory waking without permission. He worked carefully, methodically, every movement respectful. Not rushed, not tentative. Confident in the way that came from long familiarity rather than ownership. Someone behind him inhaled sharply. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He could feel the attention, the recognition settling into place like a final puzzle piece. Hands like his didn't belong to maintenance. They belonged to stages, to silence before applause. When he finished, the piano gleamed. More than that, it felt ready, balanced, settled, as if it trusted him. He closed the lid gently and stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. That was when the assistant spoke. "You learned that somewhere," she said quietly. He met her eyes. "Everyone learns somewhere." She hesitated. Not like that. He didn't respond. Silence, again, was safer. By the time he reached the service corridor, the rumor had already begun its slow crawl. No names. Just fragments. Someone said he'd seen him correct a conductor without words. Someone else mentioned a badge, old but unmistakable. The story changed shape with every telling, but the core remained. The janitor was not just a janitor. At home, the boy noticed it too. "You're quieter," he said as they sat at the small kitchen table, soup cooling between them. "I'm thinking," he replied. "About the piano?" "About choices." The boy nodded, tracing the edge of the table. "If they make you play, will you?" The question landed heavier than any accusation. He studied his son's face, the fragile strength there, the trust. "Only if I have to," he said finally. That night sleep came in fragments. Memories pressed in, concert halls, mentors, applause that once felt endless. He pushed them away, reminding himself why he'd walked away in the first place. Prestige didn't sit beside hospital beds. Music didn't sign consent forms. Survival had required sacrifice, and he'd paid it willingly. Morning brought summons. He was told to report to the executive corridor, a space he rarely entered. Glass walls reflected his coveralls back at him, multiplying his presence in a place not designed for people like him. Inside the office, the woman in white waited, posture relaxed, expression sharpened into something assessing. "Sit," she said. He didn't. She arched a brow. "You're becoming difficult." "I'm doing my job," he replied evenly. She leaned forward. "Your job doesn't include secrets." He met her gaze, unflinching. "Everyone has them." Her eyes dropped, briefly, to the chain at his neck. The piano key pendant rested plainly against his shirt now. No attempt to hide it. She recognized instinctively that it mattered. "That," she said, "isn't an accessory." "No," he agreed. Silence stretched between them, thick with unasked questions. She broke it first. "You embarrassed me?" "I fixed a problem," he said. "To you," she snapped. Then she stopped, recalibrated. Power was more effective when controlled. "People are talking. I don't like unpredictability. Neither do I." Her jaw tightened. "This ends soon." He inclined his head slightly. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. When he left the office, the hallway seemed narrower, the air heavier. Whatever anonymity he'd been clinging to was gone now. The discovery wasn't coming in a dramatic reveal. It was unfolding quietly, piece by piece, through symbols and behavior and silence. And once people started seeing, they didn't stop. By afternoon, the building felt like it was holding its breath. Schedules were adjusted without explanation. Meetings happened behind glass walls, faces turned away when he passed. The concert hall, usually a place of practiced harmony, had slipped into dissonance. Power didn't like being questioned, and it never liked being surprised. He was reassigned twice before noon. First to the upper balcony, then back down to storage, then finally to stand by near the stage. Each change felt deliberate, less about need and more about proximity. Someone wanted him close. Someone wanted to watch. He accepted every instruction without comment. Resistance would only sharpen suspicion. Calm, he'd learned, unsettled people far more than defiance. From the wings, he observed the rehearsal scheduled for that evening. It wasn't public, but it mattered. Donors would be present. Critics, too. The woman in white paced near the front rows, phone pressed to her ear, voice low and controlled. She gestured sharply at a sound engineer, then stopped mid-sentence, eyes cutting toward him. Their gazes locked. For a moment, neither looked away. She broke first, turning back to her call, but the message had already landed. "You are not invisible anymore." The orchestra began to play. The sound was good, technically flawless, but strained, like a smile held too long. He listened, tuning out everything else. Something was still wrong. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But stress was building in the system again, subtle and patient. Behind him, two technicians whispered. "That's him." "The janitor?" "Yeah." "The one from the gala." "No way." He fixed the piano in under a minute. He shifted his weight, gaze steady on the stage. Let them talk. Rumors were easier to manage than confrontations. A sharp note cut through the air, not loud enough to stop the rehearsal but wrong enough to draw his attention. He frowned slightly. The floor mics were compensating again, reacting to a resonance that shouldn't have been there. Someone had adjusted them after he left. Not out of malice, out of ignorance. He moved instinctively, then stopped himself. This time was different. Stepping in now wouldn't be invisible. It would be a declaration. He thought of the boy at home, of the fragile line he'd drawn around their life. He'd survived by staying beneath notice. But notice had found him anyway. And the building, this building, was slipping closer to failure. The conductor paused, confusion rippling through the orchestra. "We're losing balance," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "Again!" The woman in white turned sharply. "Fix it!" Engineers rushed forward, adjusting levels, speaking over one another. The sound wavered, dipped, then surged too hard. A donor in the front row grimaced. "This is embarrassing," someone muttered. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with resolve settling deep. Waiting was no longer an option. If the hall failed tonight, it wouldn't just be her reputation at stake. It would be every worker blamed for a system they didn't design. He stepped forward. The stage manager saw him first. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in understanding. She didn't stop him. He crouched near the soundboard, fingers hovering as if asking permission. The engineer beside him bristled. "Hey!" "Listen," he said quietly. The engineer faltered, confusion overtaking authority. He listened. "Your midrange is feeding back through the floor," he continued. "You're fighting the room instead of working with it." The engineer swallowed. "Then what? Shift the load. Let the hall breathe." They worked together in tense silence, hands moving fast, precise. The sound smoothed, settled, filled the space the way it was meant to. The orchestra resumed, relief spreading in real time. Applause broke out. Not from instruction, but instinct. The woman in white stood slowly, eyes burning. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not again. Not like this. She crossed the aisle with measured steps, each one an assertion of control. "You," she said sharply. "Step away from the equipment." He straightened, meeting her gaze without flinching. "The problem's solved. You don't get to decide that. The room does," he replied calmly. Gasps rippled through the small audience. No one spoke to her like that. Especially not him. She laughed, sharp and humorless. "You're a janitor." "Yes," he said. "And you needed me." The words landed hard. Around them, people froze, aware they were witnessing something that couldn't be undone. This wasn't a mistake anymore. It was a confrontation. Her smile tightened. "This ends tonight." He nodded once. "I know." As he stepped back into the shadows, the music swelled behind him, perfect now, undeniable. The power in the room had shifted again, more visibly this time. People weren't just watching anymore. They were choosing sides. And the building, old and patient, had already chosen his. The applause faded slower this time, stretched thin by uncertainty rather than joy. People clapped because the music demanded it, because silence now felt risky. He stood near the wings, posture relaxed, but every sense alert. The confrontation still hung in the air, unresolved, like a note left ringing too long. The woman in white didn't applaud. She watched him instead, calculating. Public defiance couldn't be undone, only redirected. Around her, donors exchanged glances, curiosity sharpening into interest. Power hated losing control, but it hated public scrutiny even more. Backstage, the stage manager exhaled hard. "You just crossed a line," she murmured, not accusing, just stating fact. He nodded. "I know. Then why?" "Because the line was already crossed," he said quietly. She didn't argue. Word spread fast now, no longer whispers but fragments of truth snapping together. Someone mentioned a conservatory. Someone else remembered seeing his name years ago in a program they couldn't quite place. Phones came out. Searches were made. Silence began to crack. He retreated to the service stairwell, needing distance. The concrete was cool against his back as he leaned there, eyes closed briefly. He thought of the boy, of the promise he'd made to keep life simple, safe. That promise was fraying. But so was the lie he'd been living. Footsteps echoed. The junior technician appeared, hesitant but determined. "They're looking you up," she said softly. "Not officially. Yet." "Thank you," he replied. She studied him. "You could have taken the spotlight." "You didn't." He opened his eyes. "Spotlights burn." She nodded, understanding more than she said, then hurried away. Above them, the woman in white gathered her inner circle in the private lounge. Her voice was low, controlled, but the edges were sharp. "I don't care who he was," she said. "I care who he thinks he is now." An executive shifted uncomfortably. "People noticed. They always do," she snapped. "That doesn't mean they remember. Unless we give them a reason to," another added carefully. Her eyes narrowed. She knew what they meant. The gala finale was still coming. Media. Donors. A moment designed to showcase her authority, her taste, her control over culture itself. And at the center of it all sat the piano, a plan formed, elegant in its cruelty. Downstairs, he finished his shift tasks with mechanical focus, grounding himself in routine. Mop. Check. Secure. Repeat. Each action steadied him. Yet the air vibrated with anticipation, like the building itself knew something inevitable was approaching. The stage manager found him again just before the final event. "She's calling for volunteers," she said carefully. "Anyone who wants to engage the audience." He frowned slightly. "Engage how?" "She's making a joke out of it," the manager admitted. "Says she wants to prove anyone can touch greatness." Understanding settled heavy in his chest. "She wants me on stage." "Yes." He looked toward the auditorium doors, already hearing the crowd assembling. This would be public, irreversible. Exactly what she wanted, either humiliation finished cleanly or control reasserted in front of witnesses. The pendant rested warm against his chest. The badge in his bag felt heavier than ever. Symbols didn't choose their moments. They waited for them. The manager hesitated. "You don't have to." He met her eyes, calm but resolute. "If I don't, she'll keep doing this. To someone else." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll make sure you're not alone." As he walked toward the stage entrance, "Let me pause here for a second. If you're invested in seeing Quiet Strength challenge unchecked power, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next." The doors opened. Light spilled out, bright and unforgiving. The woman in white stood center stage, microphone in hand, smile wide. "Tonight," she announced, "we celebrate talent. And dedication. Sometimes in the most unexpected places." Her gaze landed on him as ushers guided him forward. A ripple of recognition moved through the crowd. Phones lifted. Whispers surged. He stepped into the light, heart steady, breath controlled. The piano waited behind her, polished and perfect. The same instrument she'd used to mock him days before. She gestured grandly. "Since our maintenance expert seems so confident," she said lightly, "why not let him show us what he knows?" Laughter scattered, uncertain and sharp. All eyes were on him now. This was the setup. The final humiliation she believed she controlled. He looked at the piano, then at the crowd, then back at her. The building was silent, listening. And for the first time, he didn't step back into the shadows. He stepped forward. The light felt hotter than he expected, pressing against his skin as he crossed the stage. Applause didn't come. Neither did silence. What filled the hall was something sharper, anticipation edged with discomfort. People weren't sure what they were about to witness, only that it mattered. He stopped beside the piano, close enough to feel the faint vibration of the hall through its frame. The woman in white stood a few steps away, microphone still in hand, her smile fixed, triumphant. This was her moment. She believed it completely. "Go on," she said lightly. "Don't be shy." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he rested his hand on the piano lid, not opening it yet. The contact was brief, but intimate, like greeting someone after a long absence. A few people leaned forward without realizing they had. From the front row, a donor scoffed softly. Somewhere else, a laugh escaped, then died when nothing followed it. He lifted the lid slowly and adjusted the bench with deliberate care. Every movement was unhurried, precise. This wasn't performance. It was preparation. Those who knew music felt it immediately, the subtle shift from spectacle to seriousness. The woman in white glanced toward the wings, irritation flickering. This wasn't how mockery was supposed to look. He sat. The bench creaked faintly under his weight. He placed his hands in his lap, closed his eyes, and inhaled once. Deep, grounding. The hall seemed to lean toward him, as if recognizing a familiar posture it hadn't seen in years. A murmur rippled through the audience. "Is he actually going to—" "No way. He doesn't even look nervous." He opened his eyes and placed his fingers on the keys. Not dramatically, not tentatively, naturally. Before playing, he reached inside the piano and made a small adjustment, barely noticeable, correcting a tension point no one else had thought to check. A few technicians froze, watching with dawning comprehension. The woman in white stiffened. "That's enough," she snapped, mic picking up the edge in her voice. "This isn't part of the—" The first note cut through her words. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was clear, resonant, perfectly placed. The hall responded instantly, sound blooming and settling exactly as it should. Conversations stopped. Laughter evaporated. He continued. The melody unfolded with controlled restraint, every phrase deliberate, every pause intentional. It wasn't a flashy piece. It was precise, classical, unmistakable. The kind of music that exposed flaws in both player and space if either lacked discipline. This hall had been waiting for someone like him. As the music grew, something shifted in the crowd. People stopped watching him as a novelty and started listening as witnesses. Shoulders relaxed. Expressions softened. A few recognized the piece, then recognized the level of mastery required to play it this cleanly. In the wings, the stage manager covered her mouth, eyes shining. The junior technician stood rigid, awe written across her face. This wasn't maintenance skill. This was legacy. The woman in white lowered the microphone slowly. Her smile cracked. He played on, unbothered by her presence, by the cameras, by the weight of the moment. His focus narrowed to keys and breath and the way the hall answered him. Years fell away. Loss receded. What remained was truth, unfiltered and undeniable. In the front row, someone whispered a name. Another searched their phone again, frantic now. A recognition spread, quiet but electric. Halfway through, he transitioned seamlessly, shifting dynamics to test the acoustics. The hall responded perfectly. He tuned it, not with tools, but with understanding. This wasn't just music. It was proof. When the final note faded, he held his hands above the keys for a beat longer than necessary, letting silence do its work. The absence of sound was as powerful as what had come before. The room was still. Then applause erupted. Not polite, not scattered, but immediate and overwhelming. People stood without waiting for permission. The sound crashed over the stage in waves. He rose slowly, stepping back from the bench. His expression remained calm, but something in his eyes had shifted. Relief, maybe. Or release. The woman in white stared at him, shock plain now, stripped of control.
Who are you?
She asked, voice barely steady. He looked at her, then out at the crowd, then back again. Someone you didn't bother to see, he said quietly. Gasps rippled. Cameras zoomed in. He reached into his shirt and lifted the chain from around his neck. The piano key pendant caught the light, worn and unmistakable. A symbol no longer hidden. I used to belong here, he continued, voice even. I left when my family needed me more than applause. Silence fell again, heavier this time. The woman in white opened her mouth, then closed it. Power scrambled for footing it no longer had. Behind him, the piano gleamed under the lights, no longer a prop of mockery but a witness. The reversal was complete, and everyone in the room knew it. The applause didn't fade when he stepped back. It followed him, filling the hall with a force that had nothing to do with politeness or obligation. People clapped because something inside them had shifted, because they'd just watched a lie collapse in real time. He stood still for a moment, letting it pass through him without reaching for it. Applause was loud, but it was also brief. Truth lasted longer. The woman in white remained frozen near center stage, the microphone hanging uselessly at her side. Her authority had relied on framing the moment, on controlling what people believed they were seeing. She'd lost that control the second the first note rang out. Now she faced a room that no longer needed her permission to decide what mattered. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, forcing her voice into steadiness. That was unexpected. A few people laughed, but it was thin, nervous. Not the laughter she was used to commanding. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Someone in the audience called out a name, his. It came from the middle rows, tentative at first, then repeated by someone else, louder. Recognition was solidifying, passed hand to hand like a current. Phones were raised openly now. No one bothered to hide it. She turned sharply toward him. You could have told us who you were. He met her gaze calmly. You never asked who I was, he replied. You only told me who I wasn't. The words landed cleanly, impossible to deflect. Murmurs surged, this time edged with agreement. An older patron stood, cane tapping lightly against the floor. I heard you play 20 years ago, he said, voice trembling with certainty. Vienna! The winter series. The hall erupted again, louder this time. The story had snapped into focus. What had been rumor was now confirmation. Her composure cracked visibly. This isn't appropriate, she said, grasping for order. This event is about philanthropy, Not. Respect, someone else said from the crowd. It's about respect. Applause followed, sharper now, almost accusatory. He stepped forward, not toward her, but toward the audience. I didn't come back to perform, he said evenly. I came to work. When something broke, I fixed it. That's all. The simplicity of it only deepened the impact. She laughed once, harsh and disbelieving. So this is what this is, she snapped. A performance? A setup to embarrass me? He turned to face her fully, expression steady. You embarrassed yourself when you decided dignity had a dress code. The room went dead quiet. That was the moment. The one people would replay later. The exact second when power lost its footing in front of witnesses. Her jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, anger flared unchecked. Then, slowly, something else crept in. Fear. She was reading the room now, finally, and it wasn't on her side. Money could buy silence. It couldn't buy this. She straightened, smoothing her jacket, voice measured again. You're right, she said carefully. I misjudged you. The word felt small, insufficient. People waited. She swallowed. And I'm sorry. The apology landed unevenly, but it landed. Cameras caught it. Donors murmured approval, some reluctant, some genuine. The public nature of it mattered more than its perfection. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledgment without forgiveness. Thank you, he said. Nothing more. Behind them, the piano sat untouched, its role complete. The hall felt lighter now, like pressure had finally equalized. The stage manager approached cautiously. We still have the closing address, she whispered. The woman in white hesitated, then nodded. Cancel it. Gasps followed. This gala had never deviated from schedule before. Canceling the finale was an admission, a failure of recalibration. As people began to stand and talk among themselves, energy buzzing, he stepped away from the center of it all. The spotlight shifted naturally, following him despite his efforts. This wasn't about retreat anymore. It was about aftermath. In the wings, staff gathered around him, gratitude and disbelief mixing freely. The junior technician wiped at her eyes. You didn't just play, she said softly. You changed things. He thought of the boy at home, of fragile lungs and quiet trust. I just showed what was already there, he replied. Across the stage, the woman in white watched him go, something unreadable settling into her expression. This wasn't defeat. It was reckoning. The victory wasn't the applause or the apology. It was the shift. The irreversible understanding now etched into every witness present. And as he disappeared back into the service corridor, one truth followed him into the shadows. They would never look at him the same way again. The service corridor felt narrower than before, not because it had changed, but because he had. The applause still echoed faintly through the walls, chasing him even as he moved away from the stage. He didn't hurry. He never did. But his shoulders carried a weight that hadn't been there earlier. Visibility. Behind him, voices followed. He's leaving? After that? Someone stop him. No one did. He reached the locker room and sat on the worn bench, palms resting on his knees, breathing slow and deliberate. The piano key pendant slipped fully into view as he leaned forward, catching the fluorescent light. For years it had been an anchor. Now it was a marker. Footsteps approached again, more measured this time. The stage manager appeared in the doorway, flanked by two executives who looked distinctly uncomfortable being there. They want to speak with you, she said quietly. Not demanded, asked. He stood. The executive corridor no longer felt forbidden, just exposed. Glass walls reflected faces that studied him openly now, curiosity stripped of condescension. When they reached the private lounge, the woman in white was already there, standing by the window overlooking the city. Her posture was rigid, but her voice, when she spoke, had softened. You changed the narrative tonight, she said without turning. Whether you meant to or not. He waited. She faced him, expression controlled but tired. The board is concerned. They don't like surprises. Neither do families who can't afford them, he replied calmly. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. She gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. Sit! He didn't. She noticed, exhaled, then sat herself instead. It was a small thing, but it didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. "I owe you more than an apology," she said finally. "What I did, what I said, it came from a place of certainty I never questioned." He met her gaze.
Certainty is dangerous.
"Yes," she agreed quietly. "I see that now." Silence stretched, not hostile, but heavy with consequence. Outside the glass, the city glittered, indifferent. "I won't pretend this fixes everything," she continued. "But I can make something right. Publicly. Privately. However you choose." He thought of the boy, of hospital rooms and late nights and decisions that never made headlines. "Start by changing how you treat the people who keep this place standing," he said. "Not just me." She nodded slowly. "I will." One of the executives cleared his throat. "There's also the matter of your position here." He looked at him. "What about it?" "We'd like to revisit it. Proper compensation. Visibility. Perhaps a consultant role." The offer hung in the air, polished and tempting. He shook his head. "I don't want a title. I want stability. Health coverage. And time." The executive blinked, thrown off by the simplicity. "For my son," he added. Understanding passed through the room, settling differently on each face. "That can be arranged," she said quietly. "All of it." He inclined his head once. "Then do it." When he left the lounge, the building felt quieter, as if it were listening to itself. Staff no longer looked away when he passed. Some nodded. Some smiled. Some simply watched, reassessing the story they'd told themselves about who mattered. Outside, night air greeted him like an old friend. The concert hall loomed behind him, still grand, still powerful, but altered. Not broken. Redirected. At home, the apartment light was on. The boy sat at the table, sketchbook open, eyes lifting the moment the door closed. "You're late," he said. "I know. Did you play?" He sat beside him, close enough to feel warmth. "Yes." The boy studied his face carefully. "Did they listen?" He smiled, small but real. "They had no choice." The boy nodded, satisfied. He turned the sketchbook around. On the page was a drawing of a piano on a stage, lights overhead. But in the corner, small and deliberate, was a man standing beside it, not above it. "You're still my dad," the boy said matter-of-factly. He swallowed. "Always." Later, after sleep claimed the apartment again, he stood by the window, city lights blinking like distant applause. The pendant rested against his chest, lighter somehow. Tomorrow would bring changes. Interviews. Conversations. Ripples he couldn't fully predict. But tonight, something essential had been reclaimed. Not fame. Not status. Dignity. And that, he knew, was something no one could ever take from him again. Morning arrived quietly, without ceremony, like it respected what the night had already taken. He woke before the alarm, listening to the apartment breathe around him. Pipes clicked. A car passed outside. Ordinary sounds, unchanged by applause or confrontation. That steadiness mattered more than anything that had happened on stage. In the kitchen, he brewed coffee and packed a lunch the same way he always had, movements economical, familiar. When the boy shuffled in, hair still messy from sleep, he looked lighter somehow, as if something unspoken had settled into place. "They're talking about you," the boy said, climbing onto his chair. He smiled faintly. "They'll talk about something else soon enough. But you didn't disappear," the boy said, not accusing, just observing. "No," he agreed. "I didn't." They walked to school together, the morning air cool and clean. At the corner, the boy paused, studying him with that serious focus that always caught him off guard. "You don't have to hide anymore, right?" He considered the question, the truth inside it. "I don't have to pretend I'm small," he said carefully. "But I still get to choose who I am." The boy nodded, satisfied. "That's better." At the concert hall, things were already shifting. Policies posted overnight. Meetings scheduled with staff instead of donors. The woman in white moved through the building without her usual entourage, greeting people she'd never acknowledged before. It wasn't redemption. It was adjustment. But adjustments, repeated often enough, became culture. When she saw him, she stopped. "Your benefits paperwork is ready," she said. "And your schedule. Fewer nights." "Thank you," he replied. She hesitated. "You know people will expect you to stay." He met her gaze evenly. "I'll stay as long as the work matters," she nodded, accepting the boundary. News outlets ran the story all day, though none of them quite got it right. Some called it a comeback. Others framed it as scandal. A few tried to make it inspirational in a way that felt too neat. He didn't read most of it. Labels were just another kind of shortcut. What mattered happened in smaller spaces. A custodian stood a little straighter. A technician spoke up sooner. A donor listened instead of interrupting. The ripple moved quietly, not dramatic enough for headlines, but real. That evening, he sat at the piano in the empty hall, lights dimmed low, no audience, no cameras, just keys and space and breath. He played softly, not to prove anything, but to remember. The building answered him, warm and honest. When he finished, he closed the lid gently and rested his hand there for a moment. The piano key pendant brushed against his chest, familiar and unremarkable again. A symbol returned to its proper place. At home, the boy waited with a question he'd been holding all day. What happens next? He smiled. Tomorrow. And the day after. Work. School. Music when there's time. And if someone laughs again? The boy asked. He knelt, meeting his eyes. Then we'll know it says more about them than us. Later, as night settled in, he thought about how close he'd come to staying silent, how easy it would have been to let humiliation pass unchallenged. Silence had protected him once, but silence also had a cost. This time, he'd chosen differently, not for applause, not for revenge, but because dignity, once reclaimed, had a way of demanding space. And maybe that was the real music of it, not the notes, not the hall, but the moment people finally learned to listen. If you want the next story that cuts just as deep, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story, Famous Singer Forced Black Girl to Sing Alone to Mock Her. However, she hit notes he never could. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?